Okay, we're live. Hello, everybody. I'm Justine Sarabrin, and we have this incredible opportunity to interview Jess Kirkman today, and we're live, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the interview. So if you have any questions, jot them down or put them in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to them. And I'm so excited. Welcome, Jess. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I would love to dive into just your background as a woman, as a creative, and yeah, just start there.
Cool. Well, I was one of those people that grew up always doing art and knowing that some sort of creative field would be my journey and my path. So I am lucky to have had supportive parents who gave me art lessons and let me kind of play around in the creative space. And I feel like I often hear that that's where a lot of people stop, almost when they're really young or even in high school, because there's this doubt that you can make a living or have a career doing something creative or something that fulfills your passion instead of just going after something that will profit you in the end. So I went to art school in upstate New York. I went to Syracuse University. I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts there. I studied graphic design. It was called communication design. So it's just a fancy name for graphic design. And I was one of those people that, although I've always been super creative and played with a ton of mediums, I thought going into graphic design and advertising was where the money was. So I focused on that. So I kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth, I guess, but I definitely wanted to make sure I had a focus when I left. And then I moved to New York City. I actually worked in publishing. I worked at a branding house. I worked at ad agencies for about 12 years. And then about 3 years ago, I moved to California to run the in-house agency at Taco Bell. So I'm actually the executive creative director at Taco Bell. So for their in-house agency there, there's a few people on here that work with me. And also about the same time that I moved to California, I also started dabbling in a new medium called alcohol inks, which is what's behind me here. And I think what I'm known for, at least on Instagram. And when I started dabbling in alcohol inks and kind of getting into the groove of abstract art, it also led me to realize that I have a love of teaching. I would say more so just giving tips and tricks and helping other creatives find their passion, which lends itself really nicely to what I do in my day job. So I do art in the morning and I have a 9 to 5 where I run a creative team. So that's kind of my background in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. That was like a very good overview of everything.
I will say though, when you asked about being a woman, I did feel that New York City was a little dog eat dog. I also felt like advertising itself was a little bit of a man's club. It was way harder to get ahead, or I constantly felt like I was proving myself in that industry, specifically in New York. I'm in-house now. I'm on the brand side. It's very different. It's female-led as well at Taco Bell, so it's very different. But I would say, at least in the corporate sphere, it's definitely a struggle as a woman to feel like you either have to be really hard and make that your thing. If you're too soft, they look at you as emotional, soft, whatever. There's a lot of the stigma that comes with that. Luckily, in the art space, there's a lot less judgment there regarding, I don't know, gender at least. And I feel like there's a little more fluidity to define yourself. So hopefully that answers that part of that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And kind of nuts that that's still going on and it's 2020, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're in a place where that's little less intense now where you're at. I'm curious, like what is the day-to-day like work life like in what you do with Taco Bell?
So it's pretty hectic. And I would say my job specifically, because I help run the team, is my main goals are keeping the creatives inspired. I have about 50 people on the team, about 30 or so creatives. The rest are project managers and account managers and everyone who help run the show. But the creatives themselves are working on all sorts of things. So it's really, how do you keep people inspired when you're working on one brand in particular? Luckily, Taco Bell is a fun brand to work on. So there is a lot of freedom to express themselves. But I've made it sort of my mission to make sure that each individual on the creative team feels like they have a little bit of their own stamp on the brand. So we have a ton of artists on the team. I wouldn't even call them just designers. A lot of people on the team paint on the side, do like their own work on the side, passion projects, and we encourage that. So we actually have a meeting twice a month called Creative Coalition, where we actually all the creatives get together and we talk about our passion projects. We talk about fun things we've learned and we see. So we're constantly sharing inspiration, but my 9 to 5 is really just making sure I check out everything from an aesthetic point of view, making sure everything's on brand, and trying to articulate the types of changes I want to see, and not just because I want to see them, but giving the why. There should always be a reason for why I'm giving certain comments. So I try to encourage not only hearing why people made certain decisions, but I also give a why when I'm giving feedback as well.
Mhm. So how has that experience and all that branding come into play? I'm sure it's led into why you've been so successful on Instagram, would you say?
I think they go hand in hand a little bit. I think there's a confidence factor in being able to talk about creative. Um, I will say, I don't think it really matters if someone is classically trained, went to art school. I say this because I consider everyone an artist. It's really just like, what's it going to take to pull it out of you? But the one thing I think is really important that I did learn in art school is how to talk about your work and how to take constructive criticism and how to give constructive criticism. So, there are tons of people that have opinions, but are they articulating those opinions in a way that are helpful to other people? That's the kind of community I'm trying to build, not just within Taco Bell design, but within my Instagram community. And there's a lot of amazing artists that support each other and give each other helpful criticism. So it's not just about being able to give it, but it's also being able to take it and what do you do with that criticism and how can you shape it to learn from it? So I do think there's communication involved, the language involved. So what I do during the day definitely transpires into my Instagram community as well.
Mhm. That's really cool. We were just talking before you jumped on about criticism or kind of negative social media, social experiences when you come into the spotlight a little bit more. Have you ever come into a situation like that?
I think it's really easy for people to be super negative online. You can hide behind a name or a face or whatever. Yes, I will say generally people have been really supportive for me, but I also put myself out there in such a vulnerable way that it's really hard to be mean to me, I would say. I think when you're look, art is super vulnerable, and I feel like it's your personal expression of what you are going through in that moment. And there's tons of stuff that I doubt. I'm like, oh my God, should I post this? It's ugly. I mean, I go through this like 30 times a day. And at the end of the day, I try to post my experience, whether I'm happy with the outcome or not. And I think by being vulnerable and expressing vulnerability, people relate to that. So it's a lot harder to kind of be negative towards someone when they're in that vulnerable state. But I also feel like I respond pretty well to negativity. So I really just ask people to either be more helpful and constructive, or I ask them to, please leave me alone. You kind of have to create some boundaries. And, I'm not getting trolls or haters, but there's the occasional someone who says, this is a craft versus art. And I think there's a major difference between a craft and an art piece. And so that to me stings a little bit, but yeah, I think by being vulnerable, you can avoid some of that negativity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So going into more of the art that you love making and you're so well known for, it's so beautiful.
Thank you.
What inspires it? Is there like it seems like there's, like good vibes you mentioned in your bio and like really positive energy. Is there anything else that's kind of like the soul that's driving this work?
I kind of write that I'm inspired by nature and the universe. I'm really just inspired by the idea of divine inspiration as a thing. There's an amazing book. I think it's called Big Magic. I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert wrote it. And that book talks specifically about inspiration as a being or a living, moving thing. And that you just it's always there, but you just kind of have to open the door to it. And that it kind of bounces around. So if you're not open to it, that inspiration will go to someone else. So for me, it's the whole act of creating. It's the fear that you get from sitting down at a blank canvas. It's the self talk you have to do to kind of, it's almost a spiritual experience to create, because you're going through this whole internal dialogue. I'm sure this is just me, but I'm sure not the only one. And then it's about overcoming that fear and saying, let's just go with this. And the reason I love fluid art is because it takes the control away. And I will say, for years, until I found alcohol inks and fluid mediums, I was doing intricate, detailed colored pencil, marker. I hadn't found my medium of choice yet, but I was doing very controlled work. And I would say I'm pretty much a perfectionist. That the graphic design side of it kind of made me that way. But there was an unlock when I got to fluid medium, because there was so much fear of losing control, that then when you start creating and you realize that you don't need to control everything, there was a release of anxiety, of everything. And so for me, it's a meditative state that I get into. It's just, when you're driving and you don't even realize what exit you're at, because you're kind of in that like other state. I kind of describe it like that, where you just, all of a sudden your work is done and you don't even know how you got there. So there's something just about the act of releasing and letting go and realizing, hey, not everything's going to be perfect. It's like, the journey, not the destination. I really do think that is what it's about. So in terms of inspiration, that's what drives me, that constant overcoming of your inner dialogue, aside from the ocean and nature. I mean, all my color schemes come from nature, whether it be gemstones and minerals. I mean, this background I have up right now looks like tons of jasper and different stones I've seen. Or I'll travel places, or I live in California now, but I'll take pictures of plants and the dirt and all these things. That I was taking pictures of brick when I was in Sedona recently, and someone walked by and said, "You must be an artist, because I don't know what you're doing." And I was like, I am. Like, there's something so beautiful about this brick. So I'm really just inspired by nature. And I feel like you can't go wrong with color schemes if you look at a picture of nature and try to pull from that. Sometimes I feel like a lot of people have trouble with color. And one of the things I think I see people do is they say, oh, well, I really like green and I really like red, so I'm going to put them together. And, you'll get brown if you do that. But I say, look at a picture of something from nature and pull some colors out of that, and you really can't go horribly wrong. So that's kind of my little advice there.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so curious about the day-to-day life of Jess. Can you tell us, like, give us a little sneak of what that's like to have these two incredible careers going simultaneously?
Thank you for saying that. It's so funny because um, you're saying incredible careers, and that makes me really happy. Thank you. I feel very grateful. I'm very blessed. Um, but there's a lot of hustle involved in that. And so I think my days are really full and I'm pretty productive. And you kind of have to be if you want to balance those two things. So I get up in the morning. I have the best morning light in the studio early. I personally find that I'm most creative in the morning. So I would just, find your time that works for you. But for me, my day starts with going straight into the studio. Sometimes I sit there and I look at a blank piece of paper and I don't do much. Sometimes I just pick out colors I like and play around, or sometimes I get to work and I do a commission piece, or I have the ambition to kind of do something bigger. So I'll spend a few hours in the morning before work creating, and
So
then
wait, really quick.
yeah,
What time do you wake up and then what time do you get into your studio?
I get up around 6:37. And I'll tell you, before I moved to California, I was getting up at like 8:39. So I don't know. The time difference just stuck with me when I moved to the West Coast, but there's something about getting up when the light comes out that just happens now, or maybe I'm just older. I don't know what happened. I've never been a morning person, but I do get up. And I think because I found a medium I like and I'm excited to play, it gets me out of bed. So I'm always like thinking of ideas before I go to sleep. And usually if I wake up and if I go on Instagram before I get out of bed, I'm in trouble because I have like 70 ideas in my mind. So it kind of gets me out of bed and I'm like, let's just try one thing that I saw. And so I'll play around. Usually my workday starts around 9:30. So again, I'm a little lucky. I get to start a little bit of a later day. And because we're working from home right now, I usually take my first call on my headphones while I get ready for work. And then I have a full day. It usually goes till, if I'm lucky, my workday ends around 5:30. So a very full day filled with a lot of reviewing of work for Taco Bell, a lot of meetings, good meetings, but a lot of them. We have set a mandatory lunch break from 12 to 1 so that everyone gets that off. So that's a really nice relief in the middle of the day. Sometimes I'll spend that doing something in the studio. Sometimes I'll just spend it sitting on the couch and eating lunch. And then around 5:30 or so, I'll probably finish up a few things in the studio, like varnish stuff. I have an outdoor space where I do that. I don't really do a lot of the creative stuff at night. My brain's a little shot after a long day. So I'm not feeling inspired at the end of the day. But then I'll work out if I feel motivated, and then dinner, and then I'll veg out at the end of the night. So, and usually it ends with me on Instagram, answering people's comments, gathering more inspiration, and then the cycle starts all over again.
That is
That's the day
so
in the life.
cool.
It's a busy day, it sounds like.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
So you do I guess I'm trying to say you use Instagram as inspiration. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
What are you looking for there?
So I have a few different folders that I make in Instagram. You can bookmark stuff and create different folders. If you're not utilizing that feature of Instagram, I highly recommend it. It's basically like a Pinterest. But I'll look for either nature photos as one of my folders. So people post these gorgeous nature shots and they inspire me either for color scheme or for layout. And then I also look to fellow artists. Like there's so many talented people. So I usually just gather different type of abstract art. I also use encaustic medium, which is a wax medium. I look at stuff like that. I look at different techniques people are using. And so I just bookmark all these things to say like, hey, this is something I want to try in my own way later on. And so I definitely gather most of my inspiration from Instagram in terms of other artists, or some from Pinterest, but not as much as Instagram.
That's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any new projects you're really excited right now to work on?
The problem with me is I get over inspired and then I don't even know where to start. So I have about like, I was just telling my boyfriend earlier today, I'm like, I have 50 things I want to do and I don't even know what to start with. I will be starting some Christmas ornament stuff. I'm going to try some new techniques there. So that's kind of time sensitive. So I have to start there. I also, like I said, I work in encaustic and some other mediums, and I haven't gotten to do that in a while because I moved and I just have my new setup. So I'm really excited to jump back into some of the mediums I haven't been able to touch in a while and just play around. I jump around from medium to medium to medium. I get a little bored if I just sit and do one thing for too long. I used to worry a little bit that my followers would not appreciate the experimentation. You know, people almost subscribe to accounts and they want to see consistency and they want to see what they signed up for. And so there was this fear at first. I started playing with resin, started playing with encaustic, and I was like, oh, are people going to want to see this? And then I remembered, I'm not doing this for followers. I'm not doing this for Instagram. I'm doing this for myself. And then again, it's that vulnerability. So I just posted it and I was like, people don't like it. They don't have to follow me, or they can, you have to just give up on the whole follower thing. And people seem to appreciate the experimentation. And luckily, I feel like my style translates between whatever medium I'm on, but that was also another worry. You spend so long trying to find your style. And I think you find your style by making work. So if you're so focused on the type of style you're doing and not playing and experimenting, your true style is not going to be able to come out. So I actually find like my style becomes clearer when I try a bunch of things, because it forces you to, what is your take on encaustic? What is your take on resin? What is your take on alcohol ink? So it allows you to see yourself from a larger picture, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. So when you're in the studio in the mornings and you're like in the flow and you're creating, are you taking photos simultaneously? Are you thinking like, I need to capture all of this so I can use it in my social media later? Are you posting while you're in the studio? How does that kind of flow work for you?
I would say usually I have my phone at the ready. If I discover something cool, I want to, really, it's just to share either progress or something neat I discovered. It's less about capturing the work in the moment, I guess. But I usually have my phone at the ready to record stuff. I rarely kind of do a setup where I'm like, this is going to be a recorded session. I had to do that the other day because I was testing out different papers and I had to put a tripod on top of a chair, on top of a desk. So it was like this major setup thing. And then I was worried my phone would turn off mid recording, but you just kind of have to go with it. But generally, I'm letting the flow happen first. And if something cool happens, I'm like, ooh, I'll grab my phone, I'll record it at that moment. Sometimes I'll say, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to set up my phone on a tripod. And if something cool happens, I will time lapse it for people. My intention going into the studio is not necessarily to record. It's kind of something that comes along with it. But honestly, that gets in the way a little. It puts pressure on the situation, and then the flow is a little bit interrupted. So I would say if you're already feeling stuck or nervous or whatever, don't put extra pressure on yourself to record. That just comes with when I don't care. I'm like, yeah, we'll see what happens. And then I'll get something interesting. So that's kind of my thought on that.
And then you do like your full on posts later in the day, like in the evening?
I usually do it pretty much in the moment. I'll try to post once in the morning, once in the evening. I think consistency again is key for an Instagram audience, especially with the algorithms right now. I mean, I don't know. They change every 6 months and I can't keep track of it. And it's very difficult to be seen. But I do think you need to post at least once a day, no matter what. That's my advice to anyone starting on Instagram. But I usually try to get a few pieces of content a day so that I'm not feeling pressure in the week to create. So there's always just something I'm putting out there. But I don't know. Sometimes after I do something in the studio in that moment, I don't want to keep creating more. I want to post it immediately because I'm excited about something I learned. So I'll post it while I'm sitting in the studio. And there are days where I'll get in the studio and all I'll do is edit photos and post. Like I won't necessarily always create. I happen to do most of my posting from the studio. There's just something about being in there and being able to talk about it. It feels the most natural. But yeah, I usually try to give myself a few pieces of content so I don't feel pressure to create.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Thanks for sharing that, because I definitely have guilt around going into the studio and then getting into like that excitement of wanting to post something cool I just did and being in that moment and then not having all that time to be like in the flow of creating. But
I think if
cool
that's
that
what you
too.
feel like, I feel like honestly, if what you're feeling like doing is posting and that's where the creativity is coming out, that's still an expression.
Totally.
So I don't think it takes away necessarily from your time, because if you put out some new piece of content that helped someone, then that's just as useful as sitting and using that time to create. It's really whatever you're in the mood for. So I'm telling you, sometimes I get in the studio and I just stare at a blank piece of paper and because I don't feel inspired to paint anything. I just kind of want to sit with my thoughts in there. So I think just taking pressure off yourself to have a specific routine or do it a certain way, you're going to just get better flow out of that.
What I love is that you just still are committed to showing up. That's what I teach too, is just always show up, because you never know when the muse or that inspiration goddess is going to come through and like have something to say or do with you that day.
That's 100% it. And when I teach lessons as well, I literally say show up, even if it's for 10 to 15 minutes a day, even if you're just sitting in the studio and you organize your art supplies. Yeah. Awesome. Because that means you're committed to the practice. And the truth is, it is a practice. And if you're only doing this once or twice a week and you expect things to blow up for you, there's not enough energy being put into it. So I really feel like the energy though can be looking for inspiration, looking on Pinterest, looking on Instagram, writing something about it, organizing your supplies, sitting down and doing nothing in the studio. It's just committing to that part of your life in some way.
Yes, yes, yes. Well said. So do you ever have like slumps in your energy as a creative and you just like don't want to create at all? Do you ever have that?
Yes.
What do you do?
Man, yes. What I do to get out of those slumps, there's a few different things. One, I will either look at inspiration again, which sometimes can backfire because I'll start to feel insecure that I'm looking at such amazing things and I'm not creating amazing things. So it's like tread lightly on that piece of advice, but sometimes you just need to see things. Or the other thing I'll do is I will go in the studio and I will, like I said, I'll do something totally different than creating. I'll organize my art supplies, or I'll order new art supply. Like I'll order something where I'm like, ooh, when this comes, like I'll have to try it, and that will force you to kind of get into a groove again. Or just again, sit in the studio, listen to music, and just kind of be in that space. I think inspiration might not hit you. You might still feel like you're in a slump, but just putting yourself in the space, like you said, if that inspiration goddess comes down for 1 second and makes you take a pen out and scribble on a scrap, maybe it will give you an idea. Or sometimes I'll take all my scraps and cut them into business cards or put them on greeting cards and I'll write a letter to someone. Just the act of doing something will kind of get you back in the groove. So I think sitting and doing nothing won't get you out of it. So I think if you just do one thing, even if it's different than your usual medium, sometimes I'll grab a sketchbook and I'll just literally, I won't lift up my pencil. I'll just keep moving and it will just get my hand moving again. And then I'll feel better that, oh, I made scribbles at least.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of just, I'd force yourself to do anything, even if it's just like cutting up an old piece into a million pieces and then burning it. I mean, at least like you did something.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you so much. I'd love to open it up to all of you. If you all have any questions for Jess, feel free to type them in the chat and I can read them for you, or just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in.
I hope this was helpful in some way.
It has been, absolutely.
If anything, just to know that, like you said, you kind of called my career successful. And I don't think of it like that because I think we all go through this like imposter syndrome or I don't know, I doubt myself a million times a day, or I create a lot of crap and then maybe one little gem comes out of it. And I find that most people I talk to think that I'm just creating like all these masterpieces left and right and I'm always inspired. But like you said, there's slumps and there's a lot of crap being made. And I don't know, I constantly feel like an imposter, or I feel like I don't even remember how I did something. So I'm like, is it real? So if anything, I would like everyone to know that that's kind of a natural part of the process. And the only way to overcome it is by creating something and proving that otherwise.
I love that. Yeah. I know that feeling too. It's like when you're in so deep in that flow, it's like you're channeling and something is working through you. And then you look at it and like, what? How did that happen? The total like creation amnesia is so cool.
I love that part of it. I honestly, there's been tons of things I've created where afterwards I had no idea how I did it. And if you asked me to do it again, I probably couldn't.
Totally.
But that's kind of the magic that I love about it. So
yeah. We have a question from Robert. It's so nice to hear from your process, or hear more from your process. When the imposter syndrome really kicks in, do you allow yourself that moment and move on?
I think I have trained myself to know that, I mean, putting a name to it, imposter syndrome, at least helps make it a valid thing. And I read this book and I actually gave it to a bunch of members of my team at Taco Bell, but it's called Art and Fear. And I forget who writes it, but it's a really great book that talked about it almost broke down every step of what prevents it, like all the thoughts and the fearful thoughts that every artist goes through. And in it, it defined imposter syndrome and had a whole chapter on it. And that was the first time I actually read about imposter syndrome. And putting a name to it helped me because I'm like, oh, not only am I reading someone else's experience, but it's a thing. And then if you actually look it up, like so many people talk about it. I actually probably should talk about it on my own feed because I've had people ask me before. But I think recognizing that it's just part of the process. And again, like I have to talk myself through it. Or luckily enough, I do feel support. Like I'll say to Jordan, my boyfriend, I'm like, oh, I don't know, this looks like crap, or this feels like, and he'll just be like, you say this every time. Like you do this every time and you're going to post it and you're going to have people love it, or someone's going to buy it, or whatever it may be. And usually the pieces I'm most stressed to put up because I'm most insecure about, people have the most reaction to. And I think that's probably why I get that imposter syndrome, because I'm like on the verge of feeling so vulnerable that I take it like it's personal. So I think there's actually a correlation between imposter syndrome and breakthroughs, because I really feel like you're most vulnerable when you start making things that you don't know where they're going to go, which is when imposter syndrome kicks in, because you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. the whole point of art is no one knows what they're doing. And so I think you kind of just have to roll with it and say like, okay, if a piece of crap comes out of whatever I'm making, great, put it aside and you can make something else. I mean, what's the harm in that? And so kind of talking yourself off the ledge and realizing like the only harm that you can do is not create. I think that's kind of the ticket there. If it prevents you from creating, you've let it overcome. And that's where I would encourage you, like, make a mess, make something that's ugly, but make, you know what I mean?
Do you have any advice on selling your art and any kind of like block? Have you ever had any blocks around that? I know a lot of artists do with pricing work and even like talking to someone about making the sale. Have you ever
Yeah.
struggled with that?
I think there's always insecurity when you start putting a price to your work. Again, that imposter syndrome kicks in where you're like, oh, this isn't worth anything. Or honestly, sometimes even if something didn't take you very long, I think there's a lot of guilt associated with that. But here's what I would suggest, or my approach on it. One, I found my prices by posting something I felt I was comfortable with. One, with your materials. I mean, get your materials covered. That should be, don't lose money selling your art is the main thing. Start there. Cover your materials. And then it's not necessarily, oh, I put in 3 hours or 8 hours, or it's really just about, I don't know, the time in general that the dedication, the energy that you put into it. If it drained everything out of you and it's one of your proudest pieces, value it. And so I started pricing pieces where I felt comfortable, but maybe a little less than I wanted. And people would buy them. And then I would slowly increase. And I found a sweet spot. And I actually priced my pieces relatively, I would say, low, because I want people to have my art and I don't want to sit on things. I'm not precious with my art. I would rather not have a studio filled with hundreds of paintings because I priced them too high. So I want people to be able to afford nice art at the same time. And this is where I ask the community to help out here. If everyone keeps pricing their work too low, there's a common value for the mediums being used. And this happened with graphic design as well. You know, I charged a certain amount for a logo, and then someone, you know, would do it for $99 where I would charge $600. And they would say, oh, I can get it for cheaper online. And you have to try to convince of the value that you're getting and this and that. But when everyone starts valuing their work higher, the whole kind of genre can raise their prices. So I really encourage artists to value your work, what you feel is appropriate for it. And if it's crickets on your end, I think you can adjust accordingly. But if you're pricing your work so low so people kind of eat it up, you're kind of lowering the value for everyone else. And there is something about cherishing and valuing your work appropriately. So I think you kind of have to find your sweet spot. I've gone a little too high. I've gone a little too low, and I find something that works for my audience. You know, it depends who your audience is. If you're selling fine art and your materials are really expensive, like, you might only have 8 paintings a year versus 100 paintings a year. And so I think you have to take all that into consideration. But I think you got to find your sweet spot with your audience. And in terms of the confidence when you're commissioning something, I mean, your price is your price. And one thing I think, again, the advertising agency or industry has taught me, and the corporate community has taught me, is no one would kind of haggle down if you go to a tattoo artist, for instance, which I find very equivalent to a fine artist. You're not going to say, oh, well, you know, I was really thinking of spending. You don't do that. So I wouldn't worry too much about people haggling with you. I think you could leave a little wiggle room if they want to do multiple pieces. But really, if someone says, oh, that's more than I wanted to spend, I say, let me know if that ever changes for you. Or if these pieces go on sale, you know, I'll let you know. But you can't just come down to where someone's at. Occasionally, if I have like huge fans, or, you have someone that's a collector, I will give some deals. But I think we're not in the value industry. We're not like fast food here. It's very different. So I would say value your work where you feel confident that you're not just giving it away. But be cognizant of who's buying. A lot of people that are buying, they're not big collectors with lots of money. I sell a lot of work to people that are working just like me. And so I totally understand. And so $120 is a good price for them. And that's generally where I sell a lot of my paintings.
That's very cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
What about, I'm curious about this. Probably would be like the last kind of questions list. Any of you have any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or type any questions you have in the chat. We're open for that right now. But I'd love to know, so your work is mostly on these beautiful papers, right? Mm-hmm. Are you selling them framed or unframed? And are you shipping them? How are you shipping them if they're unframed?
So I work a lot on paper, and I usually sell them without the frame. I do offer with the frame if requested. Some people just want the ease of, they stress over the matting and the framing. I do offer that. It's just not, I usually tell them that it's not cost effective for them because I get my frames at Michael's. I use a coupon for them. I mean, I'll get some good frames, but I'm not going to a custom frame shop for this stuff. And I'll usually tell them, hey, there's coupons going on right now at Michael's. And I would put it in, I usually give them some advice on how to frame it themselves. I usually tell them to put a mat around it. Of course, I haven't done that for everyone who's bought stuff and they share it later and it's not framed how I would have framed it. But I make sure it's backed heavily with a hard cardboard, and then I wrap it in plastic, wrap it in tissue, and then I put it in a rigid envelope. I'll put a do not bend sticker on it. I will tell you, rarely does anything get bent, but I have seen some stuff on occasion get bent. Can't trust the Postal Service for everything. But with frame, and I do include shipping in my prices, and I do that for US at least. I do that because the shipping is minimal for me, and I feel that people often appreciate knowing what their all-in cost is right from the get-go. When something is an odd shape or I'm selling, my ornaments or whatnot, I'll usually say this includes, I like people to know it includes shipping. A lot of people like that easy number. Oh, that's what I'm spending. I don't like to kind of play that trick where I'm selling something for 120 and then they get a $10 shipping charge. So I kind of like to be transparent, and personally, I like that better too, where I know what my all-in cost is going to be, because all of a sudden I'm like, damn, I'm spending more than I wanted to with shipping. So with framing and everything, it ends up being so much more because the shipping, I don't include it. So I usually try to encourage people to frame themselves, and I try to give them advice if they are curious. And I feel like that's a good way to make sure your art gets positioned the way you want it to, and not just in like a poster frame without a mat or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Joanne is asking, what inks do you use? You said alcohol, but is there any detail on that?
Yeah, I use alcohol inks, and there's a few different brands for those of you that are either looking to try alcohol inks or are using them and maybe haven't tried other brands. I mostly use Ranger brand alcohol inks. They have a really good amount of colors, and they have some interesting undertones to them. So if you use them on Yupo paper, which is the paper that I mainly use, Yupo in particular pulls out the other colors in Ranger inks. So if it's, one of my favorite colors is denim. And when you use denim on Yupo, it's this dark blue denim color, but it bleeds this gorgeous, I mean, actually it might be behind me, but it bleeds this almost pink undertone, and then it stains the paper with a very, very, very light blue. And again, if you can see, screen, this light blue is actually not a colored paint. It's the staining from the paper underneath. So I've had a lot of people say, oh, I don't like Yupo stains and I can't get it off. For me, I actually use that to my advantage and build up layers. So that's just one note about Ranger inks and Yupo. I also use Brea Reese is a second brand I use. They have very saturated colors, very, very saturated. I actually have to dilute them, but if you're looking for like a straight up saturated ink, they're a great brand to use. Copic, they actually started as, I mean, they make markers for illustrators. They have, I think, over 500 colors. They make Copic ink refills that people use for alcohol ink. They have, if you are looking for a very specific shade of a color, you can definitely get a Copic ink in that exact shade. I don't actually use them as much because they have a little bit more, the viscosity is thicker. So it has a little bit more of a resin in the alcohol mix, which makes it not spread as easy. And when I'm using fluid ink, I really like the spread to be super fluid and easy. And if it starts kind of ending or stopping before I'm ready, it's not the look I'm going for. But a lot of people love that. And then I'll give a little shout out to this brand that's a husband-wife team. They're new to the game, but they're really great, called T-Rex Inks. They have a starter set that's gorgeous. And they're like a little startup company and they've been really nice to me. They sent me some inks to try and they're really great. So I actually highly recommend them if you're looking for like a really nice starter pack. So those are the inks I use for alcohol. Hope that helps.
So cool. So cool. So knowledgeable. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone else have any questions? Coming up to the end. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. This is like, I feel like this resonated a lot. I started working with alcohol inks at the beginning of this process with Justine's program for my Oracle cards. And I'm also a graphic designer, so I relate a lot to your practice. And I mainly just want to ask, how did you start working with alcohol inks? Like the techniques, were those learned, or did you just start playing around and messing with them, which is what I started doing? But yeah, just like techniques. And
that's a really great question. I found alcohol inks actually not by, I didn't find the inks first. I found the paper first, and I'll tell you why. If you're not familiar with my Instagram, which is Manifest Jess, I would go check it out because I make these pieces. They're actually 3D. They're called my cell series. And what I did was I was manipulating and melting plastic to create kind of these 3D cell looking pieces. And I originally got that idea. I was inspired. I used to paint like cell structures and stuff in acrylic. And I had an art show coming up. I hosted an art show at my agency in New York for the creatives. So we just did some art and we had a gallery showing, and now we do that at Taco Bell Design. And so I've been doing these art shows for about 8 or 9 years now, but it forced me to have a project to do. So I was like, ooh, I'll make a cell piece. And so I was Googling, I actually typed in like paper that doesn't melt. And of course, plastic paper came up and Yupo came up. And so I ordered a bunch of Yupo paper. I didn't even know what it was used for. So I ordered it and then I was like, well, what do people actually use this paper for other than what I'm using it for, which was like to burn it and melt it and all this stuff. And there were only maybe 2 or 3 alcohol ink artists at the time. I really couldn't find anything on it. And I didn't even want to buy inks at first because they're expensive and I didn't know if I'd like them. So I saw that people were using alcohol ink on Yupo. And so I had old Prismacolor markers that had gone a little bit dry from college, and I save everything. I'm kind of an art supply hoarder. But I broke them open. I dipped them in little glass jars. It looked like a chemist lab in my dining room. But I squeezed out all the remaining pigment from my old Prismacolor markers into alcohol. And I started playing around with my own alcohol inks for the first maybe 3 months before I was like, okay, I can probably invest in some Ranger inks or whatever. So I found the inks that way, and I found one YouTube video at the time, and Ange Miller, she's on Instagram, she's amazing. She lives in Australia. She has some, she was the first alcohol ink artist I saw on Instagram. And so I followed her, and it was kind of me and her and maybe a couple others that were doing it. I experimented myself, and the truth of the matter is I still experiment myself. And I was just talking to someone about this yesterday too. I get asked almost every day how I do something very specific. And usually it doesn't even come with a greeting. People are like, how'd you do that? And I get frustrated sometimes. Not that I don't want to share, I'll always share how I do stuff. But if you even just look through my feed or look up alcohol inks for about 10 minutes, you can find some basic instruction. And I find that a lot of people want to just know how to do something without the experimentation phase. And the experimentation is what helps you get to your style. So if you're just constantly mimicking other people's process, I don't feel like you're going to find your style as much. So I experiment. I'll find a final result I like sometimes that I see of someone's. And instead of trying to figure out how they did it, I'll try to just play around myself. And I think it sounds like that's what you're doing too, just playing around. And I feel like that's where you're going to understand the medium better, and whatever medium you're using. So if you're not going through that experimentation phase, you're only going to know how to do a certain thing instead of really understanding how the medium works, how it interacts with different materials. You know, there's so much value in playing around and messing up and what I call wasting supplies. Like there's a lot of value in not creating a final piece and just using your supplies to figure out, okay, I do experiments. I'll have 5 different pieces of paper, and I'll do one with dry ink, one with wet ink, one with, you know, I'll just see the difference. Sometimes I'll write it down. If I'm smart, I'll remember to write it down. Sometimes I'll just play around and say, ooh, that was a really cool result. And I've done that a lot with resin, with alcohol inks, with encaustic. I'll make sure to make notes of the different reactions things have. But I don't know, art and science overlap a lot. So I feel like when you're getting used to a new medium, you kind of have to figure stuff out on your own. So that was my process, at least.
So helpful.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
Cool.
Anyone else?
Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope I gave some insight.
Absolutely. This was amazing, Jess. I cannot thank you enough. I know everyone else is so grateful too. And what's the best way to find you? Do you like people to go to your Instagram or your website?
I would say find me on Instagram. I have conversations with people there because I'm always posting. That's the best way to get a hold of me. I mean, email, of course, always works, but if you want to start a conversation, if you want to, you know, talk shop, like I said, always happy to do it through my Instagram. Yeah, that's kind of my hub. Makes me a little nervous because I don't own that platform. And if it ever goes away, I lose a whole audience. But yeah, I like the community I've built on Instagram, and I like to see what people are working on. I like to follow up with people, and I like just to, I don't know, there's a very good supportive community there. So I would encourage not only people to find me there, but tap into the community. There's a huge alcohol ink community. There's also an abstract art community. All you have to do is find artists you like and start commenting on their stuff and engaging. And I don't know, try to engage, you know, and not just to get followers or get engagement yourself, but to ask these questions. And I would always just say, start with a hello if you have a question of how someone did things, because a lot of people don't do that. But
how'd you do that?
Yeah, or they'll be like, I need to know what you used here. And I'm like, I just posted about it, but I try to be nice. But yeah, find me on Instagram. It's a fun place to just have conversation.
Yeah, awesome. So, so helpful. Wow, I learned so much, and I know everyone else has too. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jess, with all my heart and soul. So good to meet you and see you and do this whole thing with you. I'm so
Yeah.
grateful to you.
Thank you for the opportunity. And like I said, please just reach out to me and let's be friends on the digital sphere. And I love to see people's work and talk shop, and maybe you can introduce me to some other cool artists. So thank you for the opportunity to be involved.
Yeah, thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, thank you, thank you.